But today we're going to deep dive on 5 realistic testing to improve incident response, sometimes called informally wargaming. And the reason this is big is, again, look, even the most sophisticated companies are experiencing breaches. You think the Department of Defense spends almost $3 billion on cybersecurity. They assume that most of their systems are penetrated, so we have to assume that our systems are penetrated and that any organization has to prepare for what do you do when that happens. Because we find that while the breach is dangerous, often the response makes things worse. You can think of, there's a primary risk that we talked about, the information is stolen, maybe there's fines involved, but handling the public relations side poorly can increase the brand damage. Handling the internal containment strategy can help turn a small breach into a big breach. So preparing for what happens after the perimeter is breached can see a lot of value. And a couple of things we find make these effective. So the right-hand side of this slide, one, the testing has to use the real checklist, right? It can't be, people say in the tabletop exercises, and there's nothing wrong with doing this around a table, but it has to involve the real procedures because you're trying to stress, do our plans work? Is this going to get what we expect out of it? 2, it has to be based around a realistic scenario so that participants aren't sitting there thinking, this is absurd, or this is either too harsh or too light. It has to feel real to people. The third one I can't stress enough, it has to be cross-functional, right? There's a clear role for security for the cyber team to regularly practice on its own. But at some frequency, whether it's quarterly or at least annually, you have to get the real senior executives. Basically, it's the people who would be in the room if you were on the front page of the journal. Right? The people who would really be there in the room responding to a true incident, they have to be there for the practice exercise. Otherwise, you're not practicing, you're pretending to practice. This isn't something where you can send your deputy or you can send a more junior executive. The real team, the real response team has to be there. Often we see this, with the real tech team in one room and the real non-tech team in the other room, including head of compliance, head of legal, head of PR, customer relations, the affected business unit, president, right? The real people who would be involved have to be involved in the practice exercise. And then just quickly on the rest of these points, it has to be realistic. It can't be based on incomplete information often. Because part of the stress of a cyber response is you're acting on incomplete information in the fog of war, if you will, and so the simulation has to reflect that. You can't have a perfectly well-defined attack because that makes it's unrealistic compared to the experience you would see during an actual incident.